Okay, so I want to begin by talking a little bit about my background because I think it's important for what I learned in graduate school. I went to City College and got a master's in English and creative writing. And it was a very rigorous program. And I thought I knew how to read. And after all, I had a bachelor's degree, I knew how to read. But when I got to graduate school, um, the thing that they emphasized was academics and research and things of that nature. And it's called the reliability of the writer, right? How can we trust this writer to tell us what they're writing? And so you have to know the background and what their influences were, what maybe their politics were, what they wrote in the past to give them some credibility to write about what they wrote about. So I thought about that before this talk, and I said, how can folks trust me as a photographer that the images that I'm taking, I have some authenticity to create these images and just present them to the world? So, in thinking about it, um, part of my education was taking two courses in journalistic writing with Claudia Dreyfus. She's a writer for the New York Times. And so I didn't know anything about journalism other than that course. And so to make this transition from wanting to be a writer to a photographer, which really wasn't an ambition of mine. I really thought I was going to be a polemicist writing these uh, uh, polemical essays on race, because at that time I had done my thesis on stereotypes. And so I was going to go on to a doctoral program, but that didn't happen. I got married and that thing crashed and burned. So I didn't go in that direction. So I had time on my hand, and I had a camera. I've always had a camera. And this is around 2007. And I had decided to take it upon myself to go around the 5 boroughs of New York City and just photograph every neighborhood of color that took of interest in me. And then I just expanded from neighborhoods of color to just every borough, to its bridges, beaches, you name it. I just went around the whole city of New York for a year and change. And when that project ended, I didn't know what else to do as far as photography is concerned. So I was in this little group that was meeting at B&H Photo, and I think it was Wednesday nights. They had this group of photographers, and I was a part of that group. And I asked one of the senior persons, I said, I did this project on the city of New York. And
Burroughs, I'm sorry to interrupt. Don't forget to share your screen.
okay, so so I got to get back to the images. Do I do it here? How do I get back to the images? To my website.
Share.
You should hit the share button and you'll see all the different tabs that you have open.
Yeah, I have this one, but I don't see my, oh, here it is. Let me go to,
There you go.
okay, let me go here. Okay, so this is the first project in Harlem, and I'm gonna put it on a slideshow, and it's gonna just keep going as I'm talking. So he said, right, photograph something you know. And at this time it's 2007, 2008. And this was when gentrification was really starting to make its presence felt. And you would hear people on the street expressing their fears about Black people going to be pushed out of Harlem, and where we're going to go. We're going to go to the Bronx, wherever people are going to move to. But it was a palpable concern. And my day job, I work in mental health. I've been in working mental health for over 17 years in forensic psychiatry. And one of the things you learn about mental health is stressors, and stressors can cause people to have problems with sleep and eating and things of that nature. And so when you're involuntarily being displaced from your home, you experience these kinds of anxiety. And so it came to me as a health issue more than just simply having people forced to move out of where they live for maybe for all of their lives or most of their lives, like myself. So I didn't have any idea about the project or doing the project. It was just something that I was thinking about. And you hear this cliche, a little birdie said, do it, right? So it was like a little birdie that said, you need to do this. And I didn't know how to go about documenting a community. So I was able to remember the course in journalistic writing about being objective and not being involved with the subjects. And so I started with these questions, and you can see with each image, there's the question, how do you feel about gentrification or the changes occurring in Harlem? And I went around with a clipboard, um, and I had the folks that they could write in on the clipboard. There was these spaces to put their comments. And I wanted to be as democratic about this as I could. If I found a male, I wanted a female. If I found a younger person, I wanted to find an older person. So as you can see from the images, they're a good representation of this community. And it took me 3 weekends to get all these images. And one of the questions I had to myself was, what am I going to ask these folks, and why should they allow me to photograph them? And so there was an article in the New York Times about gentrification by this professor at Columbia University, and he was a psychologist. And I guess he was doing some research on people being displaced through gentrification. So I had that on my clipboard. And then I heard about the Honickman Foundation for Documentary Studies at Duke University, and it was a call for entries. So I had the application for that, and I would show them why I was asking these questions is because it was going to be for this contest at Duke University. And if I won, of course, it would be great. It would result in a book. And so I was surprised they didn't need as much convincing that I thought they would need, because they were all concerned about this possibility of being moved or evicted, because a lot of folks were being evicted. A lot of folks were being evicted because they were either behind their rent, or they were illegally subletting, or of other reasons that landlords would literally try to force people out by intimidation and things of that nature. So it wasn't like this thing that was in the back of people's mind. It was in the forefront of people's mind because it was happening all the time. So as I approached each person, I just said, here's the clipboard. You can write it in, and sometimes I would write in what their responses were. And at the end of the project, I tallied up the responses, and it was a surprise to me that 50%, literally 50% of the people that you're looking at now were split. I was surprised by that. I thought they would all be absolutely opposed to it. They were in favor of it with a caveat. And the caveat was they welcomed gentrification because of the new stores that would come in and things of that nature, but they still felt it should be affordable. That was one thing that was of their primary concern, that the neighborhood should remain affordable with folks or white folks coming into Harlem. So, of course, after I submitted the project, I use the word of course, it was rejected. Mary Ellen Mark was the curator or the juror for the call for entries, and I didn't win. And then I said, what am I going to do after this? I did this project and it got rejected, and so I was fortunate enough to meet and get to know Deborah Willis a little bit. And those of you who know Deborah Willis, she's the chair and professor of photography at the Tisch School at the NYU. And I told her about my project, and she told me that the Studio Museum in Harlem was looking for photographers that was contemporary doing current work in Harlem. And through her assistance, I got my photos in this book here. 5 images are in this book. And when the New York Times did the book review, they picked one of my photographs along with Roy DeCarava, Jamel Shabazz, uh, uh, Gordon Parks, Drew Bay, were among some of the photographers that that was in the article in the New York Times. So now I'm in this book, and and she was saying, keep working on the project, keep working on the project. And so the first thing I started doing was mostly focusing on events and activities. And then I realized that, coming back to what I said earlier about what gives me authenticity to write about this community, was that I began to network with everyone I knew in Harlem that could get me in someplace. So um, whether it was a business, whether it was an organization, an event, I was allowed to come in because I was considered a son, or we use the term a son of Harlem, that they knew that I was not an outsider. And so there was an element of trust. And with that trust, I said to myself, and I said to them, that I'm not going to betray your trust by using your images to profit off of them. And I still do that to this day. Every image I have, I never have sold any of the images from my galleries or anything to any kind of establishment, anything like that. Later on in the project, I met Dr. Manning Marable, he's deceased now, was a professor of Afro-American Studies at Columbia University. And he was giving a talk at this bookstore called the U-Man Bookstores, which is no longer there. It was on between 125th and 124th and 8th Avenue by the Magic Johnson Theater. And I told him about the project. And as I was telling him about the project, he brought something to my attention that I hadn't thought about. He said, what you're doing is a major anthropological, sociological, and historical document. So you're not just taking photographs. You are building an archive of this community in transition. It's very important work, and you need to keep working on it. At that time, I had given myself 5 years, which is 2008 when it began, to about 2000. In 5 years, I figured by 2000 or 2008, 2013, 2012, I would be finished with it. So I just kept soldiering on and adding and adding and adding and adding um, images to my archive. And at this point, I have roughly between 75,000, I don't know, 77,000, because I keep adding to it. So I know I have around 75,000 images. Now, of course, 75,000 images aren't all beautiful, sharp, focused images, but it's the body of work. And so I wanted to show tonight uh, that work. I have about, I don't know, 10 galleries on my other website, which I'm going to switch over to. And then I want to spend some time showing my other projects that I do outside of Harlem that gave me an opportunity to see a different part of the city of New York that I like to share. So I'm going to switch out of this one here.
Burroughs,
Yeah.
through the process of all this shooting, what have you seen as far as the way you shoot? How's your progression come?
Well, I'll start by saying this book here
Yeah,
is the book that, as you know, W. Eugene Smith, right? He's the father or the architect of the photographic essay. And so using his methodology of a series of images was what I followed through. But also this book here, Eli Reed's Black in America, was the book that told me I could do it. When I saw his book, I said, wow, this is the template. This is the Bible for me, that a Black man can go and record Black people and show them with dignity and respect and not stereotypes. So those two photographers influenced me, and I see my work now. Sometimes I kind of cringe. I look at some photos I took, 7 years ago. Oh my God, it's terrible. And so I've actually seen the evolution of my development as a photographer. And just like when I was in the graduate program, I had to study Shakespeare and the writers now. But you study the masters, the classics,
right.
and great writing. I mean, I did a course on Shakespeare, and that was the course that taught me how to do research. So the same thing with photography. You never want to take a mediocre photograph. You want a photograph to convey something other than just a basic snapshot.
Right.
And so if I'm going to, and in terms of Manning Marable, document this community, I want to, or I strive to make great images.
Great. And Burroughs, if you could switch over to the other monitor now, because we saw the photographs are repeating.
Okay, so this one here is what I call my introductory or entree into my website. And so this is an example of me being allowed in someone's home. And his name is Nate. And Nate and I met, we were both in a joint show at the Arsenal in the Department of Parks. And so we were both allowed to exhibit there. And I met him, and he had this huge painting of a Black family. And I introduced myself to him. I didn't know he lived in Harlem. And once he introduced himself to me, I said, yeah, I'm in Harlem. I'm looking for an artist. Would you allow me? And he said, sure, come over to my apartment. So this is in one of his bedrooms where he converted this little space to do his work. So I'm not going to have time to go through every image. I just wanted to show it as an example. So those of folks who are listening in, and I'll talk a little bit about this photograph because in the 20s and the 30s, I don't know if it was primarily Black people, but people have rent parties. And so they would have people over, musicians or what have you, and folks would pay, and so they could pay their rent, and they would have like a band or a singer or whatever. And this tradition stays or is still alive in this one person's home, and she used to be the manager of St. Nick's Pub, which was on 140, I think it was 148th Street in St. Nicholas. And a lot of famous jazz artists played there. And so the fellow on the trumpet, on the saxophone, his name is Bill, his last name now. But anyway, so this is at our apartment, and she allowed me in, and I was able to shoot it. And it's a throwback to an era when that's how a lot of Black people pay their rent, by having rent parties. And the next image is sort of the same thing.
What a great idea.
This is Paula Jazz, and she's up on Edgecombe Avenue with Rudy Dreers. And how come I can't think of her name right now, but this escapes me. But she did the same, she's doing the same thing. And every Sunday around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she has Paula Jazz, and she invites certain jazz artists to sit in, and that's what they do. This is backstage at Mama I Want to Sing. This is about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago with Va Higginson. And these are the actors backstage, I guess, preparing for them to go on. This is a store that was called Scotty's Furniture. That's Scotty. And through gentrification, he lost his store.
Can't connect either. Invitations are not.
This is a restaurant called Sherman's. There were about 5 of them in Harlem. And the last location was on between 145th and 146th Street. And they fell victim to the, remember when they said they want to make restaurants have grades A, B, C, and so forth and so on. So they weren't able to raise the money because the food they sold was the but the traditional Black diet, and Blacks are moving more towards salads and things of that nature, but they were selling a lot of soul food. And so they weren't getting as many customers as they used to get. And so they went bankrupt because they couldn't get the upgrades to the restaurant to get that A. And so they wound up going out of business. And that was the last restaurant of a chain of about 5 of them. And they were a family run business. This fellow here, the ophthalmologist, is actually black. He's not white. He just looks white. And I got to know him. He let me into his office and shot that. This is the dentist. He was actually my dentist. But prior to him being my dentist, he allowed me into his practice. His name is Dr. Williams, he's a friend of mine, and to show him doing what he does. And so these images, which is the name of my project, is Harlem Hidden in Plain Sight. So these are things that are happening in the community that if you're just walking around, you won't see things like this. You know, I see the tourists that, you know, not now because of COVID, but those of you who have been to Harlem know that the tourist buses would come and they would, you know, walk around and with their cameras and stuff, but they have no idea what's going on in a lot of these spaces. Now, I'm on the top of the Polo Grounds, which is that housing project on 155th Street where Yankee Stadium used to be, right? And so down is the basketball tournament. It's the Harlem Rucker tournament. It was called the EBC, or the Entertainers Basketball Classic. And that's where Julius Erving played, and Kobe Bryant, Shaq. You go down the list of all these.
Lou Alcindor as well, right?
I think he came, but I was before my time. When I say before my time, I think he must have came in the 70s or late 80s. But definitely Dr. J, definitely Kobe, definitely Shaq, and a whole host of other folks. So I'm going to get to the next photo down the road. I'm going to scroll next to, move forward. But the promoter of this basketball tournament, his name is Greg Marius, and I got to know him, and he made me, or allowed me to, he paid me actually to be the official photographer for the tournament for about 3 seasons. And so I'll get to that as we scroll down. This is a woman, her name is Dorothy Hughes. She had the first Black-owned business that sold office supplies. And you see she wrote a book about her being priced out of Harlem. And this is Carolyn Adams, and she was the first African-American principal dancer in the Paul Taylor Dance Company. And she was also a professor of modern dance at the Juilliard School. And she was giving a talk at this community center by Marcus Garvey Park, or Mount Morris Park. And I have, you can see on the right-hand side, there's a little digital voice recorder. That's my digital voice recorder recording her talk about how she became a dancer and everything like that. She owns a brownstone in Harlem. And she wrote a book, Terry Williams, about Sugar Hill, which was the section of Harlem on Edgecombe Avenue where the Black elites, or the upper class Blacks, lived. And it was called Sugar Hill because the folks who had the money had the sugar. That was the term they used. And so basically the better educated, the professional class of Blacks lived on Edgecombe Avenue, and that goes from 155th to about 145th and 45th Street. This is the last day at Lenox Lounge, and the owner, Alan, I forget his name now, he was not wise in purchasing the building where Lenox Lounge was, and as a result, the owner raised the rent by $10,000, and so he couldn't afford to pay the rent, and he lost Lenox Lounge. And Billie Holiday actually sang in this lounge, and that was the last night. That was in 2013, December 31st, and the next day was January 1st, 2014. He had to be out that day. It's sad. This is okra, which is the staple of Black Americans, sweet potatoes. And so that's a part of the culture of Harlem, foodstuffs that you can get. This is the Harlem baptismal. It goes back to Baby Daddy Grace at the, let's see if I can find it now. You'd be surprised how much stuff you use in your brain, you can remember it all the time when you need to. So it's the United House of Prayer Church. And this began back in the 1920s, where his congregants would go out in the street and with a fire hose, they would baptize these people en masse. And this still goes on to this day. And I think I shot this in 2013, which is also a part of Harlem tradition and culture.
So Burroughs, you're sort of walking that tightrope between historian, photographer, which makes the body of work so much, has such value in the way you document it. I mean, do you like, where do you find yourself more as a photographer, a historian, documentarian? Like, how do you see yourself now?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because you have no idea how many photography outlets, whatever, have been rejecting my project. And I thought that it would be easily explained the significance of this project. So it's all three. It's historical, it's sociological, it's anthropological, but it has to be explained in a way that I think people can grasp the magnitude of it.
And you're
Because,
comfortable in all those spaces.
well, I mean, yeah, because if you think about Harlem, and I was at this talk, I have the book.
Burroughs, you're selling more people's books tonight than anything else.
Well, I mean, this book here, I don't have the cover, but it's by Jonathan Gill. And this book talks about when Manhattan was farmland, right, north of Central Park. The slaves were the ones who, when they laid out the grid, felled the trees and cleared the land for the streets to be built in Harlem. So Harlem actually was, if you think about it, according to this writer, this author, was literally built by Black people. But it wasn't built for Black people, it was built for white people. And it was later in the 20s when Blacks moved in large numbers to Harlem, because they was pushed out of San Juan Hill, which is where Lincoln Center is. So so that's part of history too, right? So people don't know that story, how Harlem came to be in terms of the land it was on, just like the Seneca tribes in Central Park, right? Because Blacks lived in Central Park at one time. So if people have to have this kind of historical knowledge of this community, and why was the Great Migration to New York City? Because they were escaping South because of the oppression and persecution in the South, and came to New York. And just like around the world, people, immigrants come to the United States, and it's a brain drain. Right? We get the best, the most talented come to the United States. And so Harlem was attracting artists and intellectuals, educated folks to be in Harlem. And then so Harlem became this epicenter of intelligentsia. That's what they call it, the Harlem Renaissance. And so this is part of the history. As a matter of fact, this photograph here is a result of, is the Dance Street of Harlem. It was founded by Arthur Mitchell. And Arthur Mitchell was the first Black ballet dancer choreographer at the New York City Ballet. And he founded this school. So again, all this stuff that I'm talking about, not stuff, but, and this is just a short period of time, right? Just have a short period of time to continue talking about it. In these photographs, the story behind these photographs, that's important. And I just want to move on real quick to this picture here, and I showed you the basketball court, and that's Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, a billionaire. Why is Mark Cuban at a basketball tournament in Harlem. As a matter of fact, the tournament was over. But the reason why Mark Cuban came, and that's Greg Maris, he's deceased, was because Kevin Durant scored, I think it was like 65 or close to 70 points in a game. And he wanted to see with his own eyes this court where Kevin Durant scored like 60, 70 points in one game. And so Greg Maris, who knew me, called me and says, listen, Mark Cuban's coming. He just photographed me and him together. I'm like, okay, great. So I grabbed my camera and I went up there and I photographed him. And that's a story.
Yeah. So Burroughs, how do you get financing to get this into a book or to get this into a university to, keep this archive?
That is the $1 million question. That's what this project is all about.
You need a rep.
This book here,
Another book he's showing.
you see this book?
Yes.
Eli Reed, this is what I want. This is what I want.
Okay.
My project needs to be in a book just like this. And so if I can find a publisher who would take an interest in this project, I'll be more than happy. I'll be overjoyed. In addition, I have audio recordings from the folks I interview, and they tell me their story. Now, the person with the guitar, you can't see his face. His name is Tyrone Fly Ty Gavon. He was the lead guitar player for BT Express. And they're in a place called Paris Blues. They went out of business last year, or actually, well, the owner of the bar died last year and no one took it over. So now it's gone, it's abandoned. But the woman who's singing, her name is Annette St. John, and she's actually the same woman I sent you the photo that you posted to send out.
Yeah.
But she was at a place called Jenny's, Jen, I forget the name of the place. It was over by the Red Rooster. What's the chef, what's his name, Samuel Markinson's place. And so she was singing with him in the bar, and you see how close I am, right? I shot that with a 15 millimeter lens with a flash because it was pitch black in there. I mean, they didn't have a spotlight in there. They only had the sconces on the wall, and got that shot. But, and this is the last in the series for this gallery. And so someone says, who's Leonard Harper? Like, who is this guy? Why has he got a street named after him? And the reason why he has a street named after him, because during the Harlem Renaissance, he's the grandson of Leonard Harper. And his grandfather was the person who came up with the idea of the review. Now, what's a review? Well, years ago, when you would go to clubs, it would either be a comedian or a dancer or a singer, but he put it all together. And so when you would go to a movie theater and they would have these shows on while they're waiting for the movie to start at a cabaret show, what have you. So his father was the one who came up with the idea. And in addition to that, he also coached Fred Astaire and the Marx Brothers about these theatrical reviews. So that's why this street is named after him. So, I mean, I'm still answering your question, is who would see the value of this and say, man, I could sell 1 million of these books or whatever, but so I have it, it's just someone finding me. I've been reaching out, but what's that song by Little Richard, keep it knocking and you can't come in?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Next week, the week after, you and I should have a conversation. Maybe we can just brainstorm some ideas on how we can help you. Just ideas will come. And other people who've produced books. Let us see. So if you could just stop sharing, right, Jay?
Okay.
Yeah. And but Burroughs, hold up the book, Burroughs, that your images are in, so we can see that book. You showed everyone else's book.
This is Studio Museum Harlem's book.
Okay, so you're in there.
It was
Great.
only Press did this.
Great. Okay, so you're in that book.
Yeah, it was only Press.
Okay. So, Burroughs, that was really that was great work. Thank you so much. You've enlightened. I'm sure you've enlightened all of us, and the reviews here in the chat room. Everyone is really inspired by your work, and recognizing how important it is.
So I can't thank you folks enough.